Next, as we consider traditional Hawaiian instruments, I want to make sure that these things are clear to you. Some representative instruments. And if you remember back to the presentation where I talked about taking snapshots of each culture, here's a few snapshots concerning indigenous instruments. So, going back to the S&H classification system, first we consider some idiophones here in Hawaii. The ipu heke, which you see as the double gourd on the upper right hand of this particular photo. The kala'au sticks, which we'll see in another slide. The uli uli in another slide. The ili ili and the hu'ili. I should mention that this particular photo in this slide has the larger double gourd ipu heke, and then on the lower left-hand corner has the smaller ipu, which is the type that the dancers would use to join in on the musical accompaniment on some hulas. You also see some membranophones here that we'll be talking about in a subsequent slide. The membranophones that we'll take a closer look at include the pahu, the larger drum there, and the punyu. If you look at the largest drum in this photo, you see what looks like a bowl on top of it, and it is actually a small membranophone with a shark skin head stretched across the top, and it's made out of a coconut shell, or a half coconut shell. In this case, it might actually be part of a gourd, but traditionally they're made out of coconut shells. We have some aerophones that are not pictured here. The pu, which is the conch shell, and the ohe hano ihu, which is the Hawaiian nose flute. Closer look at the ipu heke. Is a gourd idiophone or a double gourd idiophone. The master chanter will often use a large ipu to create a rhythm pattern and pulse for the poetry or dance. This is probably the most common presentation style of the kahiko, or older style of Hawaiian dance and poetry. Now the dancers, as I mentioned, can also use a smaller ipu while dancing. We saw a photo on a previous slide with that. The kala'au are hardwood sticks, and they're usually a small matched pair, as you see in the photo here. They can sometimes be a large staff, like a walking staff or a walking stick, plus a smaller stick to strike against that larger stick. And they are used by the dancers in the presentation. Uli uli are feathered gourd shakers, or Hawaiian maracas, if you will. It seems like most modern cultures know a little bit about maracas from salsa music, the gourd shakers of the Latin type of music. These are the Hawaiian version of that. And they are used by dancers as well. The ili ili are the smooth stones you see on a little plate here in this photo that are struck together to make clicking sounds. And some people refer to them as Hawaiian stone castanets. If you know the clicking castanets from flamenco music, it has a similar sound, but yet different enough and distinct enough. It's a little more subtle. Held between the fingers and clicked together to help establish the rhythm for the dancing. And those are also used by the dancers rather than by the kumu chanter. Here you see the pu'ili sticks. They are bamboo sticks that are split, so they make a rattling sound when they're struck together or struck against the body. They're used by dancers. They can be struck against the shoulder, struck against one another, create a nice rattling sound. The pahu is the single-head sharkskin membranophone. It is usually played by the kumu while chanting. So there are some chants where it's deemed appropriate for an ipu heke to be the accompanying instrument, the double gourd idiophone, and other chants, usually with some association to the heiau, the church, if you will, the plaza that Hawaiians use to practice their traditional religion, and it has that kind of deep membranophone sound. So I would consider it to be the second most common instrument used by kumu to create the rhythm pattern for the dance. The punyu, as you see here, is a shark skin stretched over half coconut shell, and these are used by the dancers. They're attached above the dancer's knee by a cord, and you can see that coiled up underneath the drum here in this photo. And then it's struck with a cord to create a soft sound. So this is not a sharp kind of drum sound. This is very soft and mellow, and they are used by dancers. Here we have the pu, the conch shell, and it's used for signaling. There's a great debate about whether we should call this a musical instrument, because it's not really used in a rhythmic context. It's used to make announcements or to kind of as a prelude to a dance or a hula. Here we have the Ohehanu Ihu, and some of you know Uncle Benny Kai from the Polynesian Cultural Center, one of our great MCs for the Ali'i Luau. And here he's demonstrating on the nose flute, made out of bamboo. And you know, some people have funny ideas about nose flute and, oh, that's gross, and why don't they play with their mouth like many other cultures do. The Polynesians believe that the breath, or the ha, coming from the nose is purer than from the mouth. The mouth can speak lies, it can speak deceit, it can speak unkind words, but the breath from the nose is considered to be much more pure, and so that's the breath they prefer to sound the instrument. This is also not traditionally played while dancing, but as an introduction to set a certain mood. It can be associated with royalty, it can be associated with quiet introspection, it can be associated with love as well, romantic love. Now, a couple of important concepts here in Hawaiian music and dance, just to reinforce with you. First is the idea of mana, or spiritual power. Sometimes people simply translate the Hawaiian word mana as power, but it implies so much more. There's so much more nuance to it. So we go at least as far as to say it's a type of spiritual power. Next, we talk about kauna, which is very important in Hawaiian poetry and literature. It refers to a hidden or indirect meaning in poetry. It's sometimes a metaphorical reference, sometimes a sexual innuendo. And there are many cultures, of course, including modern song and modern popular music, where there are hidden references to sexuality. And Hawaiian culture was no different traditionally. But other times it will be metaphorical. As a for instance, it might refer to, in the poetry, a mighty Norfolk pine tree, something that's recognized as a very large and stately tree. And it's used as a symbol for a certain Hawaiian king or a certain Hawaiian noble person, and making the point that they're strong and mighty like this mighty tree. Or they might make a reference to a waterfall and compare that to a person. Now let's broaden this out a little bit. We've been talking about Hawaiian music, but there's a couple of important concepts for vocal music in general. So we have a picture of someone from the Soweto Gospel Choir and from South Africa, and B.B. King, great blues legend. And they're there just to kind of zero us in on a couple of these concepts. If we have a type of vocal music that's logogenic, that's a term to describe a texted musical composition, has to have a text, has to have words, in which the words are more important to the aesthetic than any sense of melodic beauty. And those are usually in many different cultures, not just Polynesia. They are usually chants with limited range and an oft-repeated central tone. I have an example of that for you to listen to and reinforce that notion right now.
O ke ui ka huli vela ka honu, o ke ui ka huli lole kalani, o ke ui ku ka ia ka kalai, o malam malam ai ka malam.
Among human cultures, the search for one's origin is universal. Hawaiians have recorded the story of their own birth in an epic creation chant called the Kumulipo. It is an oli consisting of more than 2,000 lines telling of the rise of the first Hawaiian from a bleak cosmic night. More significantly, the text is part of a body of work emanating from a tradition that is essentially oral. Not only was genealogy preserved and transmitted in this manner down through the generations, but so were Hawaiian history, culture, tradition, and all knowledge. Learning was something that was accomplished over time, not by reading books or taking tests, but through relationships with the environment, elders, through patient observation, reflection, and practice. Native Hawaiian children traditionally practiced patience, honesty, and respect, and being pono. Pono is an overarching belief system that defines the right way to live. Being pono is the basic value in our culture from which other values grow, including those of learning and education. Not only could you not learn without being pono, but learning was pono. The history of modern Hawaii from the time of Captain Cook and the missionaries is a history of how this culture, with its unique values and mores, has been misunderstood by the West. It is a misunderstanding of tragic proportion that has unfortunately included misguided attempts at educating generations of modern Native Hawaiian students.
So on that chant, you heard a tone, and that's the main tone, the central tone. And then there are all kinds of ornamentations, vocal ornamentations that dress up that chant, so to speak. But it doesn't go up and down a scale the way many modern compositions would do and many Euro-American classical compositions would do. Please understand that doesn't make it any less aesthetically powerful. In fact, what it does is allow the listener who understands the language, understands the symbolism of the poetry, to concentrate on that without any undue distraction from another aesthetic consideration. So it's chanted rather than spoken, so it's a signal to someone that, oh, this is not just a communication of ideas in a conversational way. This is a communication of ideas, or mana, in a poetic way. Now, contrast that concept with melogenic, which is a term to describe a texted musical composition in which the melody is at least as important to the aesthetic as are the words. They're usually songs. We would consider them to be songs rather than chants, with a variety of pitches constituting the melody, and probably a vocal range of an octave or more, although that does not have to be the case. I should note here that I have not provided a YouTube link or an audio or video link to give you an example of melogenic because it's all around us. Basically, anything in popular music that's not rap is melogenic in nature. And sometimes it helps us to think about some of the more familiar European operas and the fact that many of them are in Italian, some of them in German, and we might not understand those languages. We might not have access to a translation to look at, but we can listen to those melodies and still be kind of transported and transformed by just the beauty of the melody. I'm thinking of Puccini operas as one clear example of that. When three tenors sing and you don't necessarily understand the language, but you feel the grandeur of that melody and the music that supports it, that's melogenic. Sometimes, composers can go overboard and have that melody become even more important than the communication of the words. So it's a delicate balance. Now, I need to stress here also that only vocal music can be described as either logogenic or melogenic. Of course, if you hear something repetitive by a certain instrument, it would not be as interesting perhaps to the modern listener as something that moves around more on the scale. But we don't describe those as logogenic or melogenic, only things that have words, only vocal types of forms.